Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Parker Bridge's first ever podcast. I'm Richard Malpelli, the director of Parker Bridge, which is now actually an Anchor company. Today, I'm joined by three of my division heads, which I'll introduce you to shortly. We're going to be covering a number of subjects due to the current climate. Hopefully, we can give you some insights as to what's happening in the market out there. So I've got James Hine with me from Technology, Faizan Ahmed from FMCG, and Daniel Bull that runs my industrial division. And I'll just give a brief introduction if you'd like to introduce yourselves, guys. James first.
Sure. So I'm James. I'm currently the head of technology and executive search for Parker Bridge Recruitment Thailand. So I've been in Thailand and working for Parker Bridge for the past 3.5 years. It'll be 4 years in September. Prior to this, I spent 9 years recruiting within the UK, and for most of my career, I've recruited within the IT and technology space. So I myself generally recruit at a more senior level for tech firms across Southeast Asia, covering a number of different disciplines, including sales, marketing, functional management, operations, and general management. And my team recruit primarily technical roles within software development and software testing and so on. So our clients range from sort of huge multinational organizations and household names right through to tech startups and pretty much everything in between. So we've got a nice broad range of clients that we work with.
Thanks, James. Faizan?
Hello all. My name is Faizan, and I basically am the head of the FMCG division at Parker Bridge Anchor Group. I've been in Thailand for roughly about a year. Prior to that, I was in more in-house related positions such as business partnering roles and TA roles for a variety of different blue chip companies. This includes Unilever, Friesen Campina, as well as Philip Morris, before I made my transition into Thailand. The division that I primarily manage has to do a lot in terms of consumer good products. So it ranges from a wide variety of, let's say, consumer goods companies that are international as well as local. The kinds of roles we work on are commercial and non-commercial positions, commercial being everything related to sales and marketing, and non-commercial being shared services roles, so support roles, excluding anything that's related to manufacturing.
Thanks, Faizan. Danny?
Yeah, I'm Daniel, head of the industrial division. I've got previous recruitment experience in 2 other countries, which is England and Australia. I relocated to Thailand about 2 years ago, and I joined Parker Bridge September last year. We're the newest team in the company, but we're expanding and as such working with a number of different firms. Primarily I deal with the manufacturing companies, very diverse, like automotive, medical, pharma, FMCG. But we also work with logistics, oil and gas, energy, construction. It's quite varied who we deal with.
Okay, thanks, Dan. It's quite a broad range, which obviously leads us on to our first, brings us on to our first subject. So, as you all manage different industries, I'm pretty sure there'll be different things going on with the current crisis on how they deal with stuff. I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know from each of you on what the differences are between each industry and each vertical at this time. So, again, do you want to kick it off, James?
Sure. Okay. So I guess IT and technology is a really mixed bag, basically because IT is so widespread as an industry that it really touches every corner of the economy. Pretty much every single company and every single industry sector has IT of some description within the organization. A lot of these industries have seen an effect, that's for sure. We've seen a slowdown in hiring, and a lot of companies that are currently assessing the long-term effects and how long this situation will last for. With that, we're seeing projects that are being put on hold and hiring as a consequence has stopped. But for many, they've just moved to video interviews and it's very much business as usual. And I think on that point as well, you know, for IT teams, using technology is nothing new. Video interviews, online tests, assignments, they were commonly used in the industry before the crisis. So a lot of the companies have adapted quite well, and it's been a pretty easy transition for these companies. But no doubt companies and industries have been hit hard. You know, those related to sort of travel, tourism, hotels, hospitality, food and beverage, they're kind of the worst hit. But certain industries really are prospering from the situation. I think e-commerce, delivery applications, online platforms, and obviously industries associated with healthcare technologies are actually seeing a little bit of an upsurge at the moment. So it's as I said, it's really a mixed bag.
As you mentioned, James, you mentioned obviously IT covers a lot of different industries. Are you seeing companies react differently to their IT staff across different industries?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think those that are directly affected. So, as I said, you know, the certain industries, the travel, the tourism, hotels, those types of organisations, the in-house IT teams are really at risk, purely because there's just no business, there's no customers, and there's a lot of uncertainty on how long this will sort of last for. And I think it's natural that we will see redundancies in those areas, but as I mentioned, there are other industries that are really seeing a massive upturn. E-commerce, for example, we have a couple of big clients in that area, and we're getting lots more new requirements with them almost every day. So I think it really depends how ingrained they are with this current situation, what a direct effect it is having, where some are really suffering and others actually are ramping things up at the moment.
Sure, sure. And how does that differentiate to your division, Faizan, to FMCG?
Richard, to be very honest, it's quite similar to James. So I feel that it's a category split in terms of the impact. The one thing that we've seen is definitely certain categories have taken a larger hit. And while certain categories, such as, for example, disinfectants within FMCG, it's a surge in the kind of demand that you need for a product like that. But from an overall industry perspective, there's definitely been a slowdown in commercial activity. A lot of product launches that were scheduled for Q1 have been pushed forward. I'd like to quote a couple of researches here in terms of reduction in terms of points of sale. So a research done by Kantar shows reduction of 15% in hypermarkets, 12% in supermarkets, 36% in gifting, 32% in overseas purchasing. While at the same time, as James very rightfully mentioned, certain formats and areas have hit an increase. So according to the Kantar research, a 22% increase in e-commerce, 12% on the mom and pop stores and supermarkets, and 35% increase in, for example, telephone platforms like WeChat, Line in our particular region, where people are carrying out more commercial activity through these platforms. Even in terms of new retail channels of these kinds, you have 97% more shopper interaction on these channels, as well as the 15% frequency increase of using these particular platforms. Nielsen conducted a research that there's a major change in the buying behavior of our people. So depending on the level of lockdown in each country, the consumer behavior is being shaped accordingly. So there's panic buying, there are distribution-related issues, and another research by Fredonia also mentions that 30% of companies are re-looking at how their supply chain currently works, from both short-term and long-term perspectives.
Okay. And how about so how does Thailand compare to everywhere else that you're seeing in the region at the moment?
Well, there's definitely a difference. I think, as I mentioned, that while consumer behavior is shaped directly by the restrictions put forward, those restrictions also extend to the companies as well. So let's say in certain other regions where there's a complete lockdown of, for example, intercity travel, that isn't the case in Thailand right now. Not everything comes into Bangkok. Certain goods come in different parts of the country and then are distributed through various different channels to the points of sale or retail. So Thailand still hasn't hit that area of negativity, while other countries and markets where you have an intercity restriction on travel, a lot of places the supply chain has been disrupted. So let's say if a particular product you get from a particular part of a country that's not open to any form of travel, you will definitely not find that in the stores within that particular area.
Okay, thanks for that. So Danny, obviously very interested to hear from you with the manufacturing and logistics side. In terms of your area, I would imagine it's a lot different to the other two, or are you seeing similarities?
Well, some of the points that Faizan brought up, I've kind of backed up. And the first thing I'm going to do, I've got some statistics from the National Association of Manufacturers, which is in America. So we'll use it as a benchmark, but it's not going to be exactly the same for Thailand. And it says 78.3% of manufacturers anticipate a financial impact because of COVID. 53.1% anticipate a change in operations, and 35.5% are facing supply chain disruptions. So obviously, like 78% anticipating a negative impact because of this is a lot. So as you can imagine, that's freezing a lot. It's changing the way that they do their credits. Some cases they're having to pay up front for materials, whereas they didn't have to before. They're having to do things on shift because they don't want to spread COVID in the factory. Obviously, having that happen is a massive, massive problem because they have to shut for 14 days and the loss of production is just immense. That being said, it's not all companies, kind of bouncing back to what James said. Jewelry, fashion, aerospace, electronics, automotive have all had obviously lots of problems. But on the flip side, you've got companies that make like sanitizers, food and beverage, some consumer goods which are in demand. Their capacity, or their demand, I should say, has skyrocketed.
I sent you an interesting link the other day regarding a couple of factories that used to make pillow covers and now using their staff and their production to actually make masks instead. Are you seeing that's happening a lot? They're diversifying?
I noticed on LinkedIn a company that we have dealt with, Synergy Flavors, in their head office in America, they've swapped from doing food ingredients and flavorings, and they've actually started making alcohol sanitizer, and they've given that to all their staff, but they've also started distributing that to like fire brigades and healthcare workers just to try and help them out. And yeah, we are seeing it. It is happening more and more often.
And that's the industry you've mentioned as a whole. But how are you seeing the recruitment of that because of the big numbers that you told me and the slowdown? Is that really affecting recruitment as well?
Yeah, a lot of it I think is going more towards temporary staff. For example, we dealt with a packaging company and they requested 50 workers to come in to help them reach the capacity that they needed to get to. So in some cases where the demand is going up, they are obviously needing people on a really quick short-term basis. But there are some companies like where the order books, for example, if they were full for the next 6 months full of orders and they actually projected to have a backlog, they're losing that backlog. So they don't need the materials, they don't need the supply chain, they don't need the warehousing. So all of that is getting much quieter. They've also moved a lot of people to work from home because they've got cloud-based ERP systems. But unlike IT, some manufacturing companies just aren't as modern. The technology isn't quite as new to them, and it's not quite been as well implemented. So some companies, those that are a bit more old school in how they operate, are struggling to keep up a little bit.
Sure. Well, thanks for all that, guys. I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of a bleak picture out there, but I would imagine with everything that's going on that there are opportunities that present themselves. And I would like to ask of each of you individually and have a conversation about, what opportunities now at a time like this do you think are out there, both for candidates and for clients? Because there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of people nervous about their jobs, about their companies. What opportunities do you think are out there? If I start with you again, James.
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head with regards to how a lot of people are feeling. There is a lot of uncertainty, not a lot of confidence in the marketplace, and I think these are the facts. With any crisis or recession, a lot of companies will look to cut costs, and I think the main fixed costs for most companies are the employees. So there are bound to be redundancies. I think that's just a fact of the situation. But on a more positive note, from a client perspective, up until this point, there was less than 1% unemployment in Thailand. And for most technical IT disciplines, they're in very high demand and actually low supply, especially for software engineering. So for the clients that are more stable, it's actually a really good time to add talent to their teams. There's a lot more talents available in the marketplace than usual. And I think it's not only the candidates that are at risk of redundancy. I think with the uncertain times, people generally feel insecure. So even the candidates that are working in companies that are stable and not directly at risk of redundancy, they're going to be more open to discussions than what they were before this. So I think there is opportunity there for companies to hire, and I think people are going to be more open to having those conversations as a consequence.
I think you and I have discussed this for a few years now about the candidate shortage in Thailand, and like you say, less than 1% unemployment, over 80,000 open roles, and I think that it's been very much a candidate-driven market in Thailand for a number of years. And did you see that changing now then?
I don't see it changing, to be perfectly honest. I mean, ultimately, this won't last forever. No one really knows how long it's going to last for. But in the not too distant future, I mean, that may be 3 months, it may be 6 months, it may be 12 months. But in the grand scheme of things are going to go back to normal relatively quickly. And after every bust, there's always a boom. So my advice would be the kind of the companies that are on the ball now, that are smart, that are active, are still trying to identify and speak to the real talent in the marketplace. They're the ones that will benefit from this and prosper. So I think there may be a little shift where the kind of the hiring companies might have a little bit more power than what they did before this. But I think ultimately it will sort of go back to how it was. And, you know, there's still going to be that sort of high demand and low supply that we're so used to in Thailand.
Yeah, I think one thing that will come out of this is when a lot of companies are rebuilding again, quite a few will go to the outsourcing model.
Sure.
So the recruitment companies or the staffing companies that are geared up for both permanent and the outsourcing piece, I think should do well out of this eventually as well. So
I totally agree. I mean, as I said, after every bust, there is a boom, and this can usually happen quite quickly. And when you've got that real kind of surge in demand, it's very, very difficult to recruit, you know, niche people in high volume. So there will be the demand for the outsourcing, the kind of the contract and temporary staffing. So absolutely, I think we'll see a rise in that area as well.
Good. Thanks for that. Faizan, what about the FMCG? I mean, in terms of opportunities for both clients and candidates at the moment, is it similar to James?
Richard, quite similar. I would say at the same time, what I'd like to also mention is that a lot of companies, especially the bigger players, they always, invested and launched agile working and working from home before. And so a lot of the companies already have those strong infrastructures in place. What I think has happened now that because obviously the entire market has kind of forced people into moving into that direction, even a lot of companies that previously weren't invested into this format now have to be, because that's the only way they can operate. So definitely there's going to be a difference in the way work is going to be done post the epidemic on an overall perspective. I think that this also gives the companies the opportunity to restructure, resize or right size, as they would more appropriately put it. Because obviously, so early on in the years when your plans have like a wrench thrown into them, the way that the pandemic has, you need to kind of regroup and re-strategize on the people strategy going forward. So I definitely think that will be something that will be an opportunity area for people to reorganize their organizations. Interestingly enough, I'd like to go back to the point that yourself and James mentioned, that definitely different staffing solutions are being employed. A company that genuinely always went for permanent headcount at this point in time, or maybe even for the course of the next few quarters, maybe looking at temporary solutions, maybe looking at contracting solutions. And finally, I'd like to mention from a process perspective, including the recruitment as well, other processes have also become digital. Even Dan mentioned earlier that you have online ERP systems. So I think it's a further push in the age of digitization on an overall in FMCG.
I think you make some good points there, Faizan. And Danny, would you sort of agree with most of that?
Yeah, I would. I would definitely say within manufacturing, the process does need to change. Not just talking about recruitment, but I think everything. If you don't have a cloud-based ERP system, if you can't access your data unless you're in the plant, then you really need to look at how you're going to change that to be able to work efficiently and streamline things. I mean, going back to the recruitment and manpower side, people do need to think long term. I mean, I know you can have a chat with someone over the next week, month, 2 months, 3 months, however long this pandemic is, but it can always be a long-term chat. And the beauty of it is like what James said, these people don't normally want to have conversations, but it's easy for them to do it now. They don't need to sneak out the office. They don't need to go and hide and make up some meeting they're not having. It's just a Zoom call, half an hour in a Zoom call, and you've pretty much qualified if you like the person or not, enough to know if you would like to continue in future.
I think it's a great opportunity to build long-term relationships at a time like this, without a doubt. I mean, I'm finding, obviously, through LinkedIn activity and calling my current clients and all my old clients and old contacts, and just saying, you know, hey, what's going on? It is a great opportunity and a great time to sort of like cement them relationships again.
Yeah, and the conversations have changed completely. You know, I feel like it goes back to what we discussed the other day. Everyone's always like take on the phone, and they're always like, give me jobs, sign my terms, meet my candidates. It's always do what we want. But this time, I feel like we actually are giving back. It's the partnership model that we're using.
Absolutely.
You know, we're giving advice, we're changing our strategies, we're offering new like a portfolio of services to people. I think
No, I
that's
agree.
what everyone needs to adopt.
I think you're right, and I think it sort of leads on to sort of the final subject. Really, is what do you think the long-term effects of this are going to be, and how do you think things will change in the future, James? If I can start with you on that one again.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, I think I'd just like to go back to a point that Danny made before, which I think needs highlighting further, when he said, you know, it's actually quite a good time for candidates to interview. Now, I'm sure you guys have probably had the same, and most of the people listening to this, where I've been speaking to candidates and they've been quite negative about the situation, saying, look, I want to kind of wait until I know what's happening with this, or it's not a good time to interview at the moment. And I would actually disagree. And I think that the point that Danny made is exactly that. It's a fantastic time for interviewing at the moment, because people don't have to take time off work. Companies are more than happy to do sort of video interviews, and most people are sat at home, and the people that are working for companies that are quiet in this period are sat at home with not a lot to do. So it's actually a great time to be able to do the interview, have that conversation in the comfort of your own home without having to sneak off in the morning or lie about where you are or take annual leave or anything like that. So it's actually the opposite of what a lot of people are feeling. I would say it's a really good time to have those conversations now.
I agree with that, James, and I would even say from the client's point of view as well. You know, there's no distractions. They don't have to find times within their day in and out of meetings. You know, they're at home, and like you say, with video technology and Zoom platforms and Skype and things, it's a really good time for them to sort of be in a relaxed, informal environment where they can have maybe a longer discussion with potential candidates.
Absolutely. And I think as well for candidates, one of the advantages of this situation, not an advantage perhaps, but something I would be thinking about, is it's actually a good time to reflect on things and really kind of think about your career, and most importantly, how your current employers, how your boss has treated you in this crisis. You know, have they been supportive, I should say? Have they implemented working from home quickly, or are they being negative and still dragging you into the office and exposing you potentially to the virus? You know, how your boss reacts when you're in a crisis is much more important than how they react when things are going well. So it's a time of reflection, and you know, I think it would be worth, from a candidate perspective, thinking about that and really making that I guess judgment on whether or not they've been treated well, and if this is the company for them long term.
No, I agree. So again, like I say, just put that question, the last question, back to you, the last subject really, is what do you think the long term is going to be? And you know, what do you see changing, and how do you think this is going to affect the economy and business in the future? I know it's a long-winded question, but
it's difficult to say, Richard, to be honest. I mean, no one knows if this is going to be over in a month, 3 months, 6 months. No one knows. There's a lot of conflicting information out there. So it is really hard to say what the future will hold. What I think would be kind of a major learn from this from companies, and I think it was Danny that actually touched on this point as well, is that I think it should open companies' eyes up that haven't adopted technology already. Things like the cloud-based ERP systems and cloud-based CRM systems, if they haven't implemented them already, then they're definitely going to want to do that in the future, because they will be suffering as a consequence now. So I think the adoption of technology will be at the forefront of people's minds. And, you know, I think for certain industries, this whole working from home situation has been relatively seamless. I think for myself, I've got all the tools here than what I've got in the office. So I can pretty much do everything that I can in the office at home. So it's been fine. A lot of companies haven't got that, and it may well open their eyes to think, actually, if this happens again, are we prepared for that? So I think the adoption of technology, and I think just my final point, I see that perhaps work culture and the attitude to working from home may change moving forward. I think more companies are realizing that with home working, people can be productive. I think it's a good way of kind of mixing it up and keeping things fresh. And maybe the traditional Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 sat in the office may change with more companies being more flexible on home working and spending time outside the office. So there may be a change in those two areas as far as I can see.
I agree with that as well, and I think we've obviously seen ourselves the last sort of week and a half how working from home's gone, and the productivity for most people's actually gone up. And I think you find that the people, if they're going to work in the office, then they can work from home. But if they're not working in the office while they're there, they're very unlikely to work from home as well. And I think you just have to identify the people that can. And I think obviously start relaxing a lot more in the future in terms of the working from home environment. And I think that's something that I'll definitely be looking at as well. What about yourself, Faizan? Long-term effects? Any ideas or theories?
Richard, so I think a variety of my points are very similar to a lot of things that James has mentioned. I think that within the industry itself, it really depends on which categories. As I mentioned in the beginning, certain categories are very badly hit, and that's maybe linked more to the footfall because points of sale like shopping malls and these places aren't open for people to go out and actually buy anything. Those are the categories that are affected most. If, let's say, the pandemic stretches on for another quarter or so, there could be further negative impact to the industry overall. But I think that we're all hoping that, we kind of hit the top of the parabola and then move towards a decline and business can sort of get to normal. I think that the way virtual working has been around the world will definitely change. As I've mentioned, that this is something that's been provided as a benefit to people in a lot of different organizations to give them flexibility, to give them a little bit of ease in terms of managing their own work timings. I think that it may move from being just a benefit provided to people to an option that's readily provided to people as well. In terms of managing, and not only in times of pandemic, but even in times of travel. So you could have so I maybe could be having this call with you sitting in Karachi, Pakistan, because I'm there for some reason, but then still delivering on the job. So I think it really kind of changes the landscape of how work is going to go on going forward. I think that on the recruitment front itself, I think that some strategic high-level hires that company generally take months and months and months to kind of finalize the positions. I think that critical roles in those positions will definitely become a point of focus where they're not immediately hiring people from a knee-jerk reaction perspective, but more in terms of strategically aligning what the direction is. A small example I could maybe give you is, let's say, a cosmetics business that runs through, let's say, general trade and modern trade and the usual traditional channels. Now, let's say because of their the issue of points of sale, you move completely to a digital platform to sell your products. But let's say in order to make that complete conversion, you may need a head of e-commerce or a head of digital in the organization that you never thought of hiring. Sure. In the past, maybe because of the scale of your operation. But I think companies now, they can prepare all of these particular things well before time they have to execute. So I think the focus on critical positions will become much more going forward, or at least in the next couple of months.
No, that's great feedback. Thank you for that, Faizan. And Danny, finally with you, thoughts for the future and theories on what you think may happen in your sector?
Yeah, I have a theory that we'll move more towards automation and have less of a reliance on people. You will still need people and they will need to reskill, and there will still be companies where it's not worth, or they won't get the return on investment to invest in those really expensive automated machines. But I think we'll see a lot more of that. The reason being that, with this pandemic, if you have all your operators off for 14 days, you've missed out producing everything. If you're using machines that are automated and you've only got one guy managing 2 or 3 machines or one guy per machine, it's much easier than having 3 or 4 per machine. So there's less reliance on people. So I feel like this could push us a little bit more towards automation as well. Obviously, there's going to be a spike in demand. All the aerospace, all the automotive, there's obviously no demand for any of those products now. And the first factory closed last week in Thailand, not permanently, but just on I'm not sure how long they're doing it for, but they've shut up shop. So everyone's gone home. Obviously, if there's a spike in demand, then places like that are going to have to reopen, and they're going to need to look at very, very quickly escalating their production to be able to hit the demand.
So what do you think we could do to sort of get ahead of the curve and be ready for something like that?
Well, look, I mean, we can most certainly have discussions with people now about automation engineering and project engineering. If they wanted to retrofit their machines or bring in new machines or have CapEx projects, it may seem a bit of a weird time to be talking about CapEx in the middle of this. But if someone wanted to invest in new machines in future, we would certainly have people that could help with the installation and obviously getting that up to 100% capacity and making sure it's running efficiently.
Okay, thank you. Well, listen, guys, thank you very much. So that was a quite short and sweet podcast. We'll be doing a couple more over the next couple of weeks where we'll be inviting some industry leaders from recruitment, and then another separate podcast where we're going to invite some of our clients across various industries to sort of discuss what's happening with them, right on the coal face. So again, thanks for joining us, guys, and great recording, and we'll speak again soon.
Right. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Rich.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.